Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. Again, I am Kaylee Batesman, the Content Director at SheCanCode, and today we are discussing remote horizons, navigating gender diversity in tomorrow's workforce. Today we're going to dive into the evolving landscape of remote working with our fabulous guest from Capco. We're going to explore how remote work is shaping gender diversity, particularly for women balancing caregiving responsibilities. I'm lucky enough to have three ladies from Capco with me today. I've got Hayden, Lindsay and Ange. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us on Spilling the Tea.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you on. We're going to do some intros so our listeners can learn a little bit about each of you. Ange, shall we start with you?
Cool. Hi everyone, I'm Ange. I've been at Capco for a little bit over 2 years. How did I end up as a woman in tech and finance? I spent most of my life telling myself I would never end up in finance. I thought it was insufferably boring, and somehow I ended up here, which is I don't really know what to comment on, but I studied physics and philosophy at uni. I often joke my CV reads like a long list of commitment issues. I couldn't really find something that scratched the creative side of my brain as well as like the more numerically driven analytical side of things. And I ended up basically falling into product management head first with a series of happy accidents with projects I ended up staffed on. And I found it kind of did just that. I think that balance of business and customer outcomes is really it's a really interesting problem to solve, ultimately trying to help the companies that we work with make good business decisions without sacrificing sort of to go to the customer. So that's how I've ended up as a woman in tech.
Amazing. I know we hear that story a lot at SheCanCode where people are like, I don't quite know what happened, but I ended up here and I'm pleased that I made it here. But we hear that really often, and that's actually why this podcast was started, to hear how ladies end up in tech and that you don't always have to have that technical computer science degree to end up in a tech role. Hayden, yourself.
Okay, well, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Hayden. I've been with Capco for almost a year now, and I'm currently a principal consultant, so equivalent of a manager. I'm in cybersecurity, so sort of like in a tech role, and how I end up in cybersecurity to begin with. I'll say that I didn't really choose the career actively right out of college. The career chose me, where I had an internship with Deloitte back then, right before graduation. And it was sort of like in a cybersecurity, information security role. And started with the firm for 7 years right after college. And I just feel that this is a right place and the right profession for me. So I've been pursuing cybersecurity ever since. And with Capco, just expanding my career trajectory, professional growth with the firm, and been very happy so far.
Amazing.
And
I love
nothing to
that.
complain.
Career chose me. I love that.
Literally, the career chose me.
And as
Yeah.
mentioned, there are lots of us in tech that have that feeling. Lindsay, yourself, last but not least.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Lindsay, and then I joined Capco last September. So right now I have been with Capco for a little bit over a year now. And how I ended up in tech. So unlike the other two ladies, I actually came from a very typical business background. So I graduated last year with a business degree. And then back in my university, I always have a vision of connecting the tech and business, because I always know that in order for a new technology to get implemented, you always need business perspectives to chime in. And then I always position myself as part of that. And then actually right now what I'm doing is also digital transformation, helping the banks to modernize their banking platforms. And I really enjoy that. And I hope I can bring my perspectives into today's podcast too.
Incredible. And you had an idea of what you wanted to do and how that works with tech. Who inspired you? Is it something that when you were younger you knew what you wanted to do, or was it somebody that you'd seen that maybe worked in a similar area?
I would say it's probably somebody I have seen in the past. For example, like my friends, my close friends, they not like me, they have like a technology degree, and then I'm always like fascinated by how they can use tech, write codes, but I can't write codes, but I'm trying to, contribute from business perspective into the technology implementation. Yeah.
Incredible. Well, ladies, we have a lot to cover off today, and we're going to chat about remote working. So, how has the shift to remote work impacted gender diversity in the workplace, particularly for women? Who wants to jump in first with that question?
Well, I would say that for women working in cybersecurity for 8 years now, there's so many times where I would jump into a meeting and I'm the only woman in a room or in a Zoom call. Most recently, I'm leading an effort to sort of deploy a system for my client who is a bank and was in a room with literally 15 male engineers, and I was the only woman, which can feel at this, you know, empowering, but at the same time a little intimidated by the masculine energy that's in the room.
Yeah.
So I would say that women, even now, year 2024, still significantly underrepresented in the tech industry, in the tech roles. I know that there's only about 24% of technology positions in general are filled by women. So, um, gender diversity, we're getting there, but there's still a lot to do and, to work on.
Yeah.
So,
Do you think like that? So that has definitely helped, that remote working where you perhaps feel differently at work, where you're not intimidated being in those meetings anymore, because it's like we have that nice balance now between being in the workplace and working as well virtually. So it's leveled the playing field for a lot of us that were feeling that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, since COVID, that the world that has to switch to remote work because of the pandemic. I mean, across the board, especially in the tech industry, I've seen more, women participating in the labor force. So their labor force participation rate definitely has gone up because now women, especially ones with, caregiving responsibility, that they have a child they have to care for, or caring for a dependent, a sick family member, they have access to jobs that aren't located in their city of residence. So they are able to, open up themselves to more opportunities and more jobs that are skill based and also with higher paying, I guess compensation.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I don't have to compromise, relocating to a different state across the country in the US, or have to compromise other personal commitments. So I think that really has had positive impact on improving, gender diversity in the workplace, especially for women.
Yeah.
possible?
Yeah. Lindsay, I can see you nodding along.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And then I think overall, the shift to remote work has I would say, a complex impact on gender diversity because on one hand, if you think about the flexible work hours, the great work balance, and then also the access to different opportunities, because right now women can literally just apply whatever roles they want because we don't require you to be in the office 5 days a week. But on the other hand, I'm thinking from a career trajectory perspective, sometimes you need to be in the office for visibility, for recognition. Maybe that part will, be sacrificed given the remote work scenario. But I would say, like overall, I still think women benefit a lot from the remote work initiative. Yeah.
It's definitely a balance, Ange. I could see you nodding there when Lindsay mentioned career trajectory and making sure you're in the office as well sometimes.
As like I was a COVID graduate, so I've never worked in a time period where it was expected to be in 5 days a week. So I can't really comment on whether I've seen it change massively, though I would expect it to. I think if you were going to ask me, do I think there's a uniform experience for people who work predominantly remotely or hybrid versus in person? I say no, and I think the way they're perceived, like probably unfairly so, is quite different. But I think taking like a slightly more, I guess, meta lens on it or philosophical lens on it, I think it's really important to frame this with the background that like the 9 to 5 was built on the man. It was built on sort of the male biology, the male expectations. They don't have like a monthly cycle, which some women do. Like, and I think some of those differences that might make it, a lot harder to commit to showing up on a consistent basis, they're kind of not even being considered. So I think there's some work to do on how we actually position what success looks like before we can say we're truly in sort of a remote friendly time period for women in the workplace. Might be like a controversial take, but I don't think we've actually got to the point where we understand the drivers for people wanting to be remote other than, oh, they want to spend time with their kids. Like a woman who doesn't have children has as much right to be remote as a woman who does have children.
Yes, I've had this argument in workplaces at that exact same argument where people will say it's always if you're a parent, and actually there are a lot of people that have other responsibilities as well outside of parenting. I had a sick parent for some time and almost felt like I not as an excuse, was like, oh, I need to be here, I need to be there, but it almost wasn't as taken not as seriously, but it's almost like if I don't have children, then why are you asking to, be out for the day, or you need to be somewhere for the day because I don't have children. So, but there are other caring responsibilities, and you're absolutely right though. Even if you don't have caring responsibilities, ladies still have the right to want to work remotely and have valid reasons to do so. You're absolutely right.
I think
Yeah.
there's a huge onus on the company to provide the correct infrastructure to make sure that that work that has to be done in person doesn't then just fall onto another person, because that breeds resentment, right? So conversations that I've had with people who are like, I think everyone should come back to the office 4 or 5 times a week, 9 times out of 10 is because they feel like they've been lumped with an extra unfair workload because someone's, gone home early to look after their kid, or gone home early to visit a loved one, or take care of caretaking responsibilities. And because the infrastructure is not there for, or the extra capacity for someone to take over, or that understanding's not being set with the client, people are having to scramble and pick up work, and then they're being oversubscribed and they're feeling like they've been cheated. So I think like to do remote working well, that's when we'll start to see that shift really happen and the trajectory won't be impacted. Whereas right now, if I was a manager feeling like I had to pick up 1.5 times the work because someone who reports to me has to always leave early to pick up their child, I can only imagine it would breed resentment eventually if I felt like I wasn't being supported to do that.
Yes, definitely. It has been an adjustment for everybody, and you're absolutely right. It does depend as well on the team and how it's implemented. But how I wanted to ask you, have any of you observed any specific trends regarding women with caregiving responsibilities and their participation in remote work? And you were mentioning a couple of examples there, but have you seen any trends regarding women with caregiving responsibilities?
One trend that I've observed personally, a couple of my friends who have children, they are willing to switch to a jobs that offer remote opportunities with slightly less pay, because it's a remote jobs option, and they're willing to do that because they have children to take care of, and they don't want to, and they're, the kids are too small to be sent to daycare. So that is something that I've observed personally, around me.
Yeah, that's interesting. When people make that decision to to have flexibility and over salary. I did that when I needed some flexibility, and it is a shame that you have to make that decision almost and think, I'm going to take a salary cut because at this moment in time I need to be somewhere else. I need to be doing something else where I'm not in 5 days a week and earning what I used to earn. But I know that is getting better for some people, especially with remote working. You can be a lot more flexible, and that's helping people with caring responsibilities. But yeah, it is a shame that people feel they have to make that move and have a drop in salary.
Right. Because a lot of employers, a lot of companies now, they sort of enforcing this hybrid work model, and some are not really implementing in a positive way, not really promoting gender diversity, but in a negative way, in an opposite way. So it really impacting, especially women with caregiving responsibility, that they feel that if they'll get penalized if they don't show up in their office enough, because the policy wasn't clear enough for them. And so, in the case, some of my friends, they started to feel that the model is not working, at least the hybrid model that was implemented in their old employer. They decided to, look for external opportunities and, willing to sacrifice a little bit of the pay for the level of flexibility that they used to have back then.
Yeah, agree. Ange, yourself, what trends have you seen?
I think it's probably like anecdotal, so I wouldn't want to hang my hat on any of them being like universal. But I think as someone with a South Asian background, I do notice that there still seems to be this like conflict between appreciating that work from home is still work. So that balance between the caregiving responsibilities and the corporate job, it does seem to still slightly skew in the direction of the women still taking on the majority of the caretaking responsibilities, but also maintaining a full-time job. And I think like some of that might just be cultural, and I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And I know a lot of families that, they do have two working parents who both take parental leave and both share the caregiving responsibilities. However, I can join calls with clients, and almost always the women will be on the call apologizing, sorry, I couldn't come in today because my kid didn't take very well to nursery. And I'll be like, oh my gosh, like that's so fine, bond with them over whatever like funny thing their kid said when they picked them up. I very rarely come across a father who is like, sorry, and this is not me saying that the woman's done something wrong. I just want to make that perfectly clear. But I think there's still an expectation that the woman will rush home to take after the child, but the man will stay in the office and do the hard yards because that's his job, and the wife's expected to go back. So I don't think there's this like equal respect for the career of the woman versus the career of the man when caregiving gets thrown into it.
Yeah, definitely. I had a discussion recently with a lady who said as a couple, they had both decided to take shared parental leave for both of their children. And she said as parents, it had made such a difference as well, because instead of the child always thinking as the mum, as the main caregiver, she said, actually, we found with our second child, when we really implemented that it actually made a difference, and that the child was equally thinking of both of us instead of always thinking like mum's going to turn up for everything. But she said we had to make a conscious effort to do it. And you're right, it is normally the woman who is always thought of. But she said we think it had a positive effect on our children by doing that. So
yeah, definitely. My mum always tells the story like to me that I wouldn't go to my dad until I was like 2 because he was always working and she was always looking after me. And I was like, who's this strange man that appears every evening for a brief half an hour before I go to bed? And he had to take like prolonged leave from work to like establish a bond with me as a child. And I just think also for working dads, that must be like quite difficult. Like I think that must be quite a difficult thing to overcome if you feel like you don't have the right to take that time away from being in the office.
Yeah, definitely. And Lindsay, yourself, have you seen any trends regarding caregiving responsibilities?
I would say one of the trends, just to echo back what Ange said, is sometimes women can experience some stress or even burnout even if there is the remote work initiative, because personally I found that it's very hard to find the clear boundary between my work and my life, especially you're working from home. And then even if you have the time to take care of your children, to pick up your children, but at the same time, the expectation is that you still need to finish your work before, let's say, 5 p.m. And then sometimes that can lead to even more stress for women, even if they have the time to take care of both. So I would say there needs to be a mutual effort, not only coming from the company's policy, but also coming from the different individuals, such as the woman's husband or her family's members. They need to provide more support in order for the remote work initiative to have more benefit on the women. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I agree. I definitely agree with that. It will definitely have more benefits for women in the long run. And I wanted to touch upon that because there have been a lot of changes in remote work recently. And I wanted to touch upon what recent changes in remote work, in the remote work environment, has had the most significant impact on women. You've all spoke a little bit about having that flexibility. Now people can, work remotely. What recent changes do you think have really helped with that? Do you think it's like policy changes or mindset? We've covered that a little bit. You're still thought of if you're not in the office, maybe you're not working. Angie was saying, about are you not thought of badly if you're not in the office, but perhaps you might not get considered for certain things. What do you think in terms of what's had the most significant impact on women recently?
For me, I would probably say like weirdly social media. So I was reading somewhere that like most career influencers, they tend to be women. And I think this ability to like share, like have this global shared experience. Like for example, we wouldn't all be sat having this conversation right now in Toronto, Philadelphia, and London at the same time and sharing our experience and then bonding over this shared experience without the rise of like video conferencing. And I wouldn't know that in other countries, for example, parental leave is a lot harder in the States than it is in the UK. And I wouldn't be able to empathize in the same way and understand that's different. And I think that ability for us to connect outside of work over our experiences empowers us to kind of set our boundaries in the workplace. I feel a lot more articulate when I've watched a video on someone talking about how they've set a boundary in the past. Like that might be really Gen Z of me, but I find that really helpful.
Yes, yeah, love that you touch upon boundaries and remote working. It's been such an issue with so many people. I remember in the pandemic, that was really like, how do we, I remember everybody had the anxiety of like, am I okay to log off? Is everybody going to message me like through the night, especially if you work with global teams? But we've all kind of figured out how to set those boundaries. You're absolutely right. It's such a big thing with remote working. Lindsay, Hayden, what do you think? What's had the most significant impact on women?
I would say definitely company policies, because that can include a lot of things such as the hybrid work model. Like you only need to come into office for like, let's say 2 days or 3 days a week. And then besides that, I can think about, especially for Capco, we have like those parenting and caregiver support. I remember our company offers like a $500 bonus for any new parents, and they offer like 18 weeks of parental leave time for any women that are giving birth to children. So I think that really helps to kind of benefit the women employees. And on the other hand, I realize nowadays there is the increasing awareness of both the gender diversity as well as the well-being issues. And like for example, right now we are having the podcast about like women and also gender diversity. And then in Capco, we also have different affinity groups like Wellbeing at Cato. I'm only speaking for like Toronto. They have different workshops or even like launch and learn in order to help facilitate people to have more awareness of not only the well-being and also gender diversity.
Yeah, that's so interesting as well. Talking more about it makes such a difference to how everybody's feeling as well in the workplace, because that was really strange when we all started working from home. Previously, I used to feel like if I needed to work from home because I was taking in a parcel or something that day, I'd always feel like my manager was looking at me like, oh, you're not going to be working that day. You know, it was like a thing. It was like, oh, you're probably not going to work. So I think we all had the same anxieties when we all ended up doing hybrid working. But I agree with the policies and writing things in so you know where you need to be and whether it's 2 days, and then you feel comfortable with, like Ange said, setting those boundaries, like you know it's been written into policy and you feel a lot more comfortable with how that is going to go and what's expected of you. Hayden, yourself, what do you think has had significant impact?
So something that I personally experiencing is, with the shift to hybrid work model, I'm not sure how it is in Toronto or London, but in the US, a lot of our clients, Capco's clients, are requiring our consultants to show up on site, 3, 4 days a week. And, you're expected to be on site at 8:30 in the morning and for 8 to 9 hours a day. And so that expectation and requirements from our clients, of course, to us clients first. So that has really changed for, a lot of women that, you have to meet with that expectation. So now it leaves you a very much little flexibility, even though we call it a hybrid work model, is not, is mostly on site. So you're pretty much returning not to a Capco office, but a client office, which is sort of the same thing. So that level of commitment can have some sort of, well, put women in a challenging position, especially ones with caregiving responsibilities that, okay, now you're gonna have to, ask for help either from your parents if you have kids, or you have to send them to daycare if, they are old enough. If they're too young, you probably have to find out some other ways, or, work with your family, your husband to make sure that, family commitments and responsibilities are taken care of while women are at work and have to make sure that we, meet with the client's expectation and demand.
Yes, yes, and you're right. It goes back to that again of knowing what's expected of you, and if you have to be on site, knowing that you have to be on site for that client, and as you said, finding those support networks from elsewhere if you need to. Which leads perfectly into about how companies can better support women. Because when you're in that situation, how do you think companies can better support women, particularly those with caregiving responsibilities in a remote work setup?
So I would say that one of the things that I've seen when Capco is doing, even in my previous firm, that, there are programs to provide with childcare and caregiving support, something like a subsidized program to help lift some financial burden, for women, because, a lot of the times women, they can't afford sending the kids to childcare for whatever reasons, right? And so having that sort of subsidized program provided by the company is extremely helpful. So that sort of gives women an option to take care of, their loved ones, their children, and still be able to, meet with client expectations, career, work expectations.
Yes, and definitely would retain female talent as well if those programs were
For sure.
available.
Mhm.
Yeah, because a lot of companies are thinking, where are all the women in tech? And then you get them in and there's no programs to help you or retain you. So the
Right,
good companies know how to do that.
right.
And yourself, how can companies better support women, do you think?
I think sticking by what they say and being consistent and making sure they see that process end to end. So I can only speak from a consultancy point of view. But like Hayden mentioned, if you have committed to being sort of a flexible company and supporting hybrid work or remote work, and then the client has come and said, we expect you in 4 days, 5 days a week, I do personally think, and I appreciate I'm fairly junior, so I don't understand how these things work. So I'm speaking like entirely candidly. I would expect that there's sort of a meeting in the middle where we say, okay, but in honesty, we don't support that as a policy. We're happy for them to come in, 3 times a week, but as one of our principles is, be yourself at work or inclusion, and that includes be yourself at work if you're a mother that needs to look after their kids. I think it's all very well having the childcare provisions, but I don't actually know how much of that money they cover, and it might come onto a question later, but I do think there's something inherently privileged about assuming that someone can afford 2 full days of childcare, or 3 full days of childcare, or 4 full days of childcare. And so I would like to say companies who work with other companies, so consultancies or tech companies, they hold their boundaries for their employees. They actually go out on a limb and say, like, okay, can one of those 4 days a week be a day that we have jurisdiction over? So they come to you 3 days a week, and the people who have a remote working setup with Capco are able to continue to be flexible. We don't want you to miss out on this talent. They're a really good fit for the project. Sell it to them, because you have that relationship. You're doing something good for the company. You have a leg to stand on. And I'd love to see a future where companies feel confident enough to do that for women.
Yeah, you're right. And also, I was thinking then, as you were speaking about that expense, because you mentioned their childcare and whether or not somebody can afford an extra day childcare. For those of us that don't have children, that have to travel into London, for instance, your train ticket can be very expensive. And if you're expected to go in extra days, I live quite far out of the city. So when I'm asked to come in days I'm not expected, I'm thinking in my head, well, that's just cost me a lot. So it's those things as well that
It
suddenly,
adds up.
yeah.
I think the pushback you always get to that, because it is a conversation that happens a lot in London, because like what the train fares are like. And it's, you signed up for a London job, you're getting London salary, and like I understand that pushback, but I think it's sort of around, okay, but like if we're trying to live up to our values, like there are people who that salary is just about covering them and a partner, or them and someone who they have a dependent for, or them and a child. And the cost of living in places like London, I assume Toronto and Philadelphia must be very similar, is extremely high at the moment. And like people are just about making ends meet. So I think there is almost like a degree of like, okay, we get it. We understand that on paper, people have signed up for this, but we didn't sign up for like a global recession and 4 years of pandemic. So somewhere something has to give.
Yeah, exactly. And the good companies, they do know how to make it work and retain talent, and yeah, make it work for everybody, because yeah, they just know that good talent eventually will just walk if they don't set those boundaries, as you said, Ange, for their employees. Lindsay, yourself, what do you think that companies could do to better support women?
I would say another aspect is for companies to create or initiate some kind of recognition or rewards programs, because I feel that personally, I love looking to a role model for my career, and I feel like that applies to women too. For example, companies can maybe celebrate and acknowledge the achievements of the women that manage the work and life balance pretty well, so that other women from the company maybe can just look up to that woman, use her as a role model. I believe that can definitely increase the visibility piece as well as boost the morale. Like women can for sure do a great job, even if she has different responsibilities. She has the work, she has the children. Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree. And companies that are showcasing that as well, it is so important. And Capco do a really good job of that, because we had a podcast with 3 parents who wanted to talk about how they're doing, how they balance their work and life as new parents. And you're absolutely right. The more stories that you hear about how people are balancing remote work and being in the office and juggling parenthood and being a carer for loved ones, the easier it is to think that's okay and I'll stay here. Because if you have those different stages of your life, and you might be sitting there quite junior in your career now, thinking maybe this isn't the company for when I do move through those stages of my life and I do have a child or I have to look after somebody, then you will be thinking at this point, I haven't heard a good story yet, and you might want to leave. But the more positive stories you hear from within about like the two ladies and the guy that we had on the podcast, it was great to have a guy as well share what that is like for him and the time that he took off work to become a new parent. The easier it is for you to make those decisions when you do move through those seasons in your life.
I want to piggyback. I want to piggyback on Lindsay's point. As she made a very good point about the recognition program, but I think companies can also um, you know, initiate mentorship or leadership programs for women. For example, in Capco, we have women in cyber, and we also have other resource group to, and also your discussion, panel discussion just between women, and we have participations from, the female leaders in our company to share tips, guidance, and advice how for women to thrive professionally, to help with their career progression and still be able to navigate the challenges of, handling caregiving responsibilities.
Yeah, and to hear those challenges, you're right to share those with one another, and sometimes just to hear that you're not the only person that's feeling that way, especially when it comes to things like
But
imposter
you're not alone.
syndrome. Yeah,
Mhm.
we're all feeling that way. Yeah, the more that you hear it, the more it puts you at ease at work. What about the opportunities that remote working presents for companies in terms of tapping into a diverse talent pool? What do you think of that? What kind of opportunities does it present to find a more diverse talent pool?
I think it's back to that inclusion point. I think it's understanding that there's like a huge associated privilege with being able to fund yourself either straight out of uni or early in your career or later in life as an individual in a very expensive city to manage that as well as a 9 to 5 career and potentially also another human. It takes a village, and the assumption that people have family in the vicinity, or the assumption that people have enough like wealth aggregated to cover those costs. If you work off that assumption, you're excluding, probably 80 to 90% of the population. Like, especially in the UK, I think I probably be bang on in saying everyone at Capco would fit well within the top 10% of earners in the UK because there's such wealth disparity and such wage disparity. And I think that there are people who would have to turn down jobs, like you mentioned, Hayden, sort of in the reverse. People would have to turn them down because they aren't remote and because they aren't flexible. So I think you're missing out on people who don't have the financial flexibility, backing, independence, or whatever. And you're missing out on their talent because you think they don't exist or you're not taking them into account.
Yes, definitely. And you suffer as a company as a result because you don't end up with that diverse talent pool that you are looking for, or might be on the surface actively looking for, but underneath that, you're not actually making it easy for yourselves if you haven't got remote working in place. And as you said, it just excludes a whole bunch of people that think, actually, I can't apply for that. You're right. Lindsay, Hayden, what do you think that it remote working presents for companies to be able to tap into a diverse workforce?
So I believe eventually it leads to a new competitive advantage for companies, because companies can kind of use remote work as their new value, because employees or the best talent, they always look for companies that have great values, companies that are forward looking. And then we all know that after COVID, the world has completely changed. Like remote work is a new future for everyone. And then to better attract the different talents, companies that has that remote work value can, I believe, attract more people from different geographic areas to join them. And then that ultimately benefits the diverse talent pool.
Yes, definitely. I do agree with that, diverse talent pools as well in companies. I don't think it's something that that years ago when we used to start talking about diverse workforces, it used to be a nice to have, and now I think companies realize that it's far more than a nice to have, and that to survive and to be profitable as a business, you really need to find ways to diversify your workforce, and things like remote working are definitely ways that companies are now having to implement that to ensure that they have that diverse talent pool, definitely. Hayden, yourself.
So I'll say that, while companies benefit greatly from diverse talent pool, because given that they are considering offering remote options and job opportunities for job applicants, I'll say that it also poses a challenge for the companies to come out or implement programs, initiatives that would promote career advancement and visibility for women. Because even in this year 2024, I read somewhere, I think it's a research from Deloitte, that still less than a quarter of leadership roles are held by women in general. So I can imagine that the number is even lower for women in tech. And for multiple reasons, right? But I'm sure one of the reasons would be because that, women working remotely, we have limited networking opportunities and also limited visibility. And because of that, it makes it extremely, extremely hard for career advancement. For women like me who is in mid-level management, if we want to proceed to senior management, we're gonna have we're going to need company support, a bias-free evaluation program to make sure that we are evaluated fair and square against other peers, and not because, we're not, being put at a disadvantage because that we are allowed to work from home, we have that privilege to work from home, or, having that flexible schedule.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I love that, which ties back into what we were talking about earlier about career trajectory, and if you're in the office and not being put at a disadvantage. I think that's always come down to social events as well, that a lot of ladies have felt disadvantaged because they might have after work events that are happening, and you think, oh, I have to go and collect a child, or
Right.
and I think, why can't we do things in the day?
Exactly. For sure.
Ladies, we're almost out of time, and I wanted to ask you one more question. How do you foresee the future of remote working evolving, particularly concerned in gender diversity and inclusion?
I would say that one thing for sure, that the hybrid work model is here to stay. I know that many companies, they try to sort of revert back to a pre-pandemic era where they like to bring their employees back to the office for multiple reasons. But I think for foreseeable future, the hybrid work model, or even some companies where they still promoting remote first, which is great, is definitely here to stay.
Yes, yeah. And I think the companies where people were feeling like, oh, suddenly we're having to come back in, or if you started at that company in 2020 and there was a different clause in your contract to what there is now, people were thinking, actually, that isn't for me. And like we said before, retaining good talent, you have to have that option of remote working or hybrid working, at least, because good talent will go elsewhere and try and find it elsewhere. So
Exactly.
I agree, it's here to stay. Lindsay, yourself, what do you foresee for the future of remote working?
So for the future of remote working, I can foresee that there will be a cultural shift meaning that because remote work is our new kind of future, there needs to be a culture shift towards evaluating the contribution and the results that the employee made instead of thinking whether the employee is in the office today or not. And that requires company level effort. That requires not only people contribute, even if they are working from home, and also leadership or your managers view that part and take into consideration that part. And I believe to support that cultural shift happened, companies need to do a lot of policy innovations, because people keep talking about how the policies are not perfect because remote work is eventually a new thing for everyone, and companies need to evolve their policies to better support women's work-life balance, to even create a new robust performance metric where you can take into consideration of the different people's different responsibilities, and as well as looking at their performance as a whole.
Yes, I love the fact that you said that's a company effort. It's a company-wide thing, because I think some companies are still in that, and it's the same with diversity sometimes. They think just things happen by magic, or cultures just kind of turn up in company cultures are just kind of created overnight, but actually it takes a really long time to implement something and to be consistent and to come from the top down as well. If you're leaders and your executive team are also flexible in the way that they work, and you see that trickles down as well. But you're right, it has to be something that is an effort, and it is company wide. It doesn't just happen by magic overnight. It's very much an effort.
I would like to see us getting more creative with the problems that we're raising about work. So I often hear, there's a lack of connection. It's way harder to be social. But a really great example. So I used to work at Lululemon in another life, and that's like a retail company. So they really they rely on people being in person. But during COVID, I was still working with them, and I remember we had a Christmas social, and they took the effort to send us all these cupcake decorating kits, and we all jumped on a Zoom call and we all decorated the cupcakes together because we literally couldn't be together. And I think that kind of creative thinking, it just takes an extra 1% consideration to be like, how can we make this inclusive? And I'd love to think that, especially in a innovative, entrepreneurial mindset company, you'd have the people who come up with those ideas. And then on the specifics around gender diversity and inclusion, I'd love the companies to take a really intersectional lens when they look at their policies. So on that thing around privilege, accrual of wealth, the different cultural backgrounds and expectations, and how that might change someone's ability to manage, additional 50% workload. I would love for that to be eventually part of table stakes of what we use to create our policies. So we're not just creating with this homogenous idea of the woman or the non-man. So anyone who doesn't identify as sort of the majority in the situation, we're not just ideating with one vision of that in mind, but understanding that there's a huge spectrum of people that fall into this category of not a typical cis white het male working in tech or finance.
Yes, I agree, and you're right in that it isn't just blanket for everybody, and that again, it takes that company effort to be able to do that. I love the idea of being more creative, and what happened with you, that's a really nice touch, and would really help to retain staff as well during a tough time. So yeah, that's lovely when companies get really creative with their staff, and you feel like you're actually part of something and not just a worker, that you're not just somebody that's doing something, ticking boxes for them every day, that you're really part of that team. Ladies, we are already out of time. It's absolutely flown by. So thank you so much, Ange, Lindsay and Hayden. Thank you so much for coming on here and having a chat on Spilling the Tea. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. And for everybody listening, as always, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.